Shabbat Shalom. For those of you I haven't yet met, I'm Deborah Anstandig, the Hebrew College Rabbinic Intern. 6.5 months in, I think most of us know each other, but just in case. Last year, when I was studying in Israel, I was based in Jerusalem, but I gravitated towards spending my free time in Tel Aviv because the water is so nourishing, and being so close to a beach, even when I didn't go in, was calming. A friend told me she took surfing lessons in Tel Aviv, so I decided to give it a try. Now, I'm picturing some California guy with bleached blonde hair as my teacher, but Alex, also known as Aryeh, was a British Ole who had worked as a Jewish studies teacher, if I had to guess, in a pretty Orthodox school for years in London before moving to Israel. He taught me the basic skills of how to mount and stabilize myself, first on sand on the surfboard, before moving to the water. He was a really good teacher. I can get you his contact information for those who are interested. But after a few lessons, I was actually able to stand up on the board in the water for 5 seconds. It was scary and it was fun, and my lessons were peppered with Torah. But this week, I seem to be finding myself thinking of another surfer who wasn't surfing for pleasure, but because his ship wrecked at a storm at sea. The Talmud relates how Rabbi Akiva, who lived through the rise of the Roman Empire and the destruction of the Second Temple, once was on a shipwreck, and he clung to a single board that served as his flotation device to get to dry land. The Talmud reports that with every wave, Rabbi Akiva adjusted his body, nodding his head to respond. I imagine he was shifting his weight, much like Alex taught me, to remain upright amidst violent storms. Now, the Hebrew word that the Talmud uses to describe Rabbi Akiva's makeshift board is the word daf. For modern Hebrew speakers, the word daf describes a piece of paper or a page. It's also the word that we use to describe a page of the Talmud. I see you're with me. It's the worldwide pagination system. So when Rabbi Akiva clings to the daf in the storm, the story begs not only to be interpreted literally, but metaphorically. Because in the midst of Rabbi Akiva's scary and changing world, wrapped with instability, Rabbi Akiva clung to Torah. What provides any of us steadiness, or at least the capacity to hold on in the midst of a world that feels replete with storms? I've tried a lot of flotation devices in these last few weeks, months, and years. But the one that I've regularly returned to is my connection to studying Torah. And it's fair to say, as Rabbi Willis referenced, this is our collective anniversary of engaging with Torah. This is our nation-altering moment, and we relived it today. 3 months after their departure from Egypt, this group of slaves, having experienced God miraculously, as we read last week at the sea, comes to stand before God just to meet God's presence. Now, it's famously reported that we don't really know what part of these 10 utterances they heard directly from God. Some suggest God said all 10. Others noting a change in the tense that Yael read so beautifully between the first 2 and the last 8. It goes from I am to thou shalt have. Don't read your book, read your things. Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Suggested that God only spoke the first 2. And my favorite is the 18th century Hasidic master Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Rimanov, who suggests that what they heard from God was only the first letter. The first letter of Anochi is an aleph, which is, unless you're a very guttural Israeli, silent. So according to tradition, the people had a felt experience of God, but it was quiet. And yet, This experience didn't radically change our people. We know that it took them only weeks to violate the second commandment, build a calf, and return to their complaining selves. This sometimes leaves me incredibly frustrated, but lately, the human condition, I feel humbled by watching and reading their story. It's really true that people take a radically long time to change. Ask any organizational psychologist how long it takes to begin to shift a culture. Research says at least 5 years. So how a people who have lived for generations with the trauma as slaves learn to come to trust God and to become actually teachable? That's not a given. Sometimes it feels like we collectively aren't so different from them. We make progress, seemingly know how to work together through principles and values to improve the world, but sometimes it feels that we're bereft. We've exhausted our resources, and we'd rather point fingers, complain, and scream. And yet our story is a story of a people with resilience and continuity, because towards the end of Moshe's life, he will exhort the children of Israel, those who weren't actually there, and say exactly what he says as follows. Lo et avotenu karat Adonai et habrit hazot. It wasn't with our ancestors that God made this covenant. Ki itanu, anachnu, ela po hayom, kulanu chayim. It was you, those of you who are here 40 years later, who are standing here alive. The covenant is with you. Moses isn't revising history. He is imparting the essential lesson that resonates today. In order to carry this tradition on, you have to find a way to connect to its moment of origin. When you feel like you're lost, you have to remember that you yourself have been chosen to be a part of this story. You yourself have the privilege and responsibility of carrying it forward. This is why my teacher and Rabbi Willis's teacher, Dr. Deborah Steinmetz, wrote about in her recent book, Why Rain Comes From Above, Explorations in Religious Imagination. Deborah writes, we live ourselves into these stories so that they continue to live in us, into our everyday lives, which is why we stood. And we were in Lexington and still are, but we were also this morning over there in the desert. And I think from reading about our ancestors, we can learn that we don't have to be perfect. We can be our messy, irreverent, exhausted, fearful selves. We come by it really honestly. We are a people who strive, who study, and sometimes manage to use crises as opportunities to reinvent ourselves anew. And that's why learning Torah as my anchor is so hopeful, because it's not cerebral, it's an identity-affirming act. Hebrew College graduate Rabbi Monica Gomeri wrote that when we reach for our spiritual practice, like learning, when the going gets hard, we can ask for the Torah to open us up to vulnerability, honesty, synthesis, and self-reflection. And one more Hebrew College graduate who I just adore, Rabbi Alex Matthews, shared that sometimes when our reserves feel dry, we can remember the silent Aleph, pray for God's presence and the wisdom to navigate to dry land. To close, I'd like to share a poem that hangs outside of a surfing school in Jaffa that I found on one of my walks. In English, it says, SEA, S-E-A, the good, surf therapy school. And this is the poem that I translated from the Hebrew. May it be your will that we merit in your great kindness to enter the sea with humility, to surf in peace and to return in peace. May we merit to enjoy every moment, to learn from every wave in the sea and also in life. May we contain all the fears that limit us and learn from them. Just as one wave breaks and another is built anew, may we know how to begin again. May we merit to complete what we have started. Shabbat Shalom.